Zoom chat so you can see them.
Yes, that'll be great. All right, let's go ahead and kick off our next session before we take a break. This is a presentation on managing multiple generations of heterogeneous hardware. It's presented by Jonas Arndt, architect from HP, and Jose Prabhu Inbaraj from AMI. So with that, let me hand it to you. If you guys can share the slides and present.
Sure. Let me share my deck. Screen. Perfect. Can you see this, Hemal, team?
Yes, we can see. And before you start, 20 minutes and 10, that's how it's been configured, but effectively you have total 30 minutes.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Hemal. Yeah. Shall we go ahead and start?
Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you, Hemal. Hello, everybody. The topic today that we're going to talk about is managing multiple generations of heterogeneous hardware. My name is Jose Prabhu Inbaraj. I'm Senior Director from AMI. And with me, I have Jonas Arndt, Chief Technologist from HP.
Hi, guys.
Hello. Let's start with infrastructure management challenges, right? We all know that the edge cloud is growing tremendously. That's an understatement, right? With the consumer demands asking for much thicker data, right? And also faster access in terms of ability to get the information where they want. And also in parallel from the industrial needs in terms of IoT. The edge cloud is growing tremendously. So what this means is the data centers are being distributed geographically. So you are managing, if you are a provider, you are managing your infrastructure, which is geographically spread across. Right? Now, in complicating it, there is also the multi-vendor aspect, right? So as a vendor, when I source platforms for my data center, the vendors, there's going to be multi-vendor, and the platforms are also going to be heterogeneous. The agility of the application need, the demand is much faster. The refresh cycle is also much faster. That forces companies to source them very frequently. And depending on the CapEx, OpEx needs, the vendors, different vendors, the platforms are very, very mixed, right? So if we are managing, if a data center is managing, they're having heterogeneous types of platforms from several vendors. Then comes in the alignment part. Now, in a data center where it is very segregated, right? We have compute, we have storage, and FPGAs, networking, different types of platforms that gets into the edge cloud. Now, how do we manage from one single point of view, right? Each platform has its own management standards. And I know if you take compute, it's going to be managed in a different way. For storage, there's Redfish and different. So there is no one single or an easier alignment in terms of making it easier to manage all the platforms. Then comes in the closed solutions, right? As with most of the vendors, leading vendors nowadays, any platform that comes into the market, it comes with their own management firmware or management software. So every vendor has their extensive set of management tools. So if I'm managing a data center which has platforms from 3 different vendors, I end up with 3 different tools to manage all those platforms together. So this is just a tiny bit of the management and that much more. Right? This slide explains a little bit just to give her coherence on where we stand, right, in terms of what the difficulties are. So the bottom layer here that you see, that's the physical infrastructure. Right? It's completely disaggregated infrastructure. So if a data center, if we are designing a data center now, you're going to build with a rack or compute or a chassis full of compute nodes, and then compute full of storage, and then a thick network switch or platform. With that, we want to be able to dynamically compose or software-defined infrastructure where you want to build a system depending on the application that you're planning to run, right? With ever-growing needs, with new applications that's coming into market more frequently, the need to dynamically build a system that matches the need of the application, whether it is compute intensive or network intensive, depending on that, you want to build a system. So this physical layer is where you are having the disaggregated platforms. Now, the complexity there is when a platform is being there. Now, the standards to manage them, if you take compute, that comes with, we started with IPMI much for a while. Now we have moved to Redfish, which is very well adopted and very well, extensive also. Now, if you take storage, that is Swordfish. Now, for network, we have SNMP and Yang, right? Likewise, for each and every type of platform, every type of resource that we are managing, the standards and the protocols are different. Imagine the complexity that this middle layer, the physical infrastructure management layer, has to go with, right? Now, I have vendor provided applications to manage the platforms that they provide. So if I have a mix of platforms across my data centers, now the top layer, which is the operation support system or business support system, let's say, Mano implementations, right? Which is the layer that consumes all this physical infrastructure. Now they decide what application runs where. So when they want to deploy an application, when they want to build something, they will have to deal with vendors A's management software, vendor B's, if they have to build a platform. So this gives the complications on the management of heterogeneous type of devices, right? So how do we solve it? So that's when we got together, a handful of companies got together, discussed this problem and thought of creating and created this open distributed infrastructure management stack. Yeah, we call it ODIM. Now, Jonas, you can step in. Jonas will talk more about what ODIM is and how we envision it to grow. Jonas, here you go.
Yep, yeah, I'm on. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, good deal. So ODIM, so that is a project. The reason we made it an open source project is that we were thinking that if like HPE would release a management stack that could deal with all the vendors, we wouldn't really be taken seriously by the industry. So the idea was that we all get together and we try to figure out what is the best approach. So that's why we started that project. And if we just go to the next page,
sure.
We had a few objectives there. One of the most important initial objective on the top is that we always speak Redfish. We have a very well-defined version. We have the latest version of Redfish, as close to the latest as possible. And because Redfish is well-defined, we can basically, a lot of things throughout the industry already speaks Redfish. But Redfish is a little bit, you can implement it and call yourself Redfish compliant by just implementing a few of those properties. So we also have some profiles that we want to put forward, ODIM profiles that dictates what properties needs to be implemented and so on and so forth. On the southbound side, we want to be able to have an abstraction layer or a management layer, interface layer. We call it plugin layer. So we can plug in different type of translators from different version of Redfish, different vendors, and different management protocols. For instance, if you want to manage something else than Redfish, like IPMI or SNMP bound or so. So the idea is that the northbound client of ODIM doesn't have to worry at all about what the actual resources management interfaces is and what API it puts forward. The other thing is that we also want to make sure that we can do some aggregated operations then. You hit ODIM and you can, for instance, take a group of resources and do something to them, like an action, reset them or start an upgrade or something. So that aggregation type of thing actually led to us working with the MTF for quite some time. And if you look at the release 2020.2, that is the first time the aggregation service comes out, and that's what we are implementing in ODIM as well. Also, ODIM is actually a proxy, so the northbound clients do not have to have a foot on the management network, and also it doesn't have to know about all the resources in the data center. It can just simply ask ODIM, and it doesn't have to have knowledge of credentials and things of that nature, as long as the client can authenticate with ODIM. Finally, the initial focus here is really on compute, storage, acceleration, and fabrics. So next slide, Jose. Thanks. So then, if you remember the horrible picture that Jose put forward before with all the different lines going from different clients to different management stacks to different resources, this turns into this now. Then when the top, you have different type of clients from an operating system, perhaps from Ironic, OpenStack, or something else like Kubernetes. Anything that can speak Redfish can now then manage this infrastructure. And from on the southbound side, you see that you have all the differences in the management protocol sort of encapsulated in this plugin layer. So you can create plugins for different type of infrastructure. Another use case that I forgot to mention for aggregation is that if you want to subscribe to events from all this infrastructure, you can also do that by a single call to the event service and a collection of resources and say, hey, I want events from all these resources. And then the northbound clients can simply receive those events instead of having to reach out to every single resource and set up subscriptions. So next slide, Niels. So this is a little closer, a deeper look at the architecture in ODEM, and you can see that ODEM is kind of the dotted red line here. And what you see is that we have a Redfish data model that is implemented, and what properties are actually there is dictated by the ODEM profiles then. And then on the top layer, there is obviously an API service that put forward all the Redfish APIs. And then there are different Redfish services that are standing up this solution. We have account service, event service, some tasks, some session, and then later on, right now we don't have the composition service, but that is being contributed by AMI actually. And then we are going to have update service and telemetry service and these type of things as well. On the southbound side, we have this plugin layer. So if some vendor then wants to write their own plugin and contribute it to the project, they can do that. The plugin will then basically speak the management protocol it needs to with the resource, and it would do translation from that over to Redfish and populate the mandated Redfish properties. There is also a possibility to have a closed source plugin as well if the vendor doesn't want to contribute it to the project but keep some secret sauce or what have you. You can have a closed source plugin and use that in ODEM as well. So that's the plugin layer, and that is what basically makes up ODEM as the solution stands right now. So next slide. So this is same picture, but a little bit more about first out the project, and I think Joe has a slide later on who the different type of companies we have. But we have different vendors, hardware vendors, and we have like orchestration vendors and other type of participants in the project that have a stake in this. And then obviously the project itself has identified a couple of external other industry initiatives that we feel are of importance or interest. First out, Redfish, we obviously have a close relationship with these guys, working with enhancing the standard. One of our principles is to not release something that is not part of the Redfish specification. So if we want something new on the top of ODEM, we work with Redfish to try to get it implemented. Other organization that we've already started communicating with and collaborate with is CNTT. Obviously, we want to also work with OCP here, and specifically, we think that the profiles that you guys have been working on seems to be very interesting, and we'd like to refer to them rather than have our own ODEM profiles. Perhaps we have something on top of that, but that's something that we're thinking about. All right, I think that's all for this slide. And then just looking at the initial seed code and where we are today. When we open sourced this and started the project, I think it was back in June sometime, there was some seed code, and you can see that the account service is there, the aggregation service is there, event service and session service is there. A composition service is being contributed by AMI, and we have also Intel working on some contributions here, specifically the unmanaged rack plugin for now. Unmanaged rack plugin, why do you need that? A rack that doesn't have a manager interface. We might still want to know what's inside it, and we want to be able from the northbound side of ODEM to model the whole data center. So basically, there are some chassis objects under the rack and properties like contains what is in the rack, or location, where is the rack, what aisle, and how, what GPS coordinates, what altitude, and these type of things. So that you can get for unmanaged rack by this unmanaged rack plugin is the idea. So that's where we are now. There is also a Redfish, generic Redfish plugin that was contributed also by HPE initially when we upstreamed some of this, and that is assuming though that the resources managed is compliant with the ODIN profiles, which is very rarely the case. So, but it's quite useful to stand up, and you can hook it up to any type of Redfish server, and you will get some usability out of it. So, and it also serves as a template for anybody who wants to develop a plugin. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is back to you, Jose, to talk a little bit about the formation of the project and these type of things.
Yeah, thank you, Jonas. So let me talk about the formation and the governance part of ODIN, right? So for any open source initiative to succeed, when we are building a solution, its success depends on how much participation we have, especially in the entire cross-section of the stakeholders, right? That's very, very, very critical. That's when you will be able to have inputs from all players, from all layers, so that we can address all the use cases that the industry believes they need is. So the example list of stakeholders that we have on the left side of the box, right? Communication service providers, enterprises, cloud service providers, managed hosting, OEMs or TEMs, telco equipment manufacturers, IT vendors, and also orchestration software providers. So our goal is to have players from each of these segments so that ODIN together, when we build something, it is really useful for all players in this segment. What are the advantages? Leveled playing field, meaning each player, wherever they are playing in that market, they will be able to add their value, they will be able to influence. Right? Room for value add and differentiation, as with any open source based solution. When you are able to leverage this and build upon it, then you have the ability to really add your own value to this solution and then differentiate if you need. Influencing open standards. Jonas spoke about this, right? When you are part of ODIN type of community, ODIN especially, when you have a problem that you're addressing, and if you believe that is a generic way of taking the industry towards, then we have a forum to go to DMTF, Redfish, or any other forum that we are talking to, like CCNT, and influence their roadmap in terms of what gets defined, what profiles, what schemas get defined. Time to market, this is another advantage. By leveraging the source, you build a solution. You don't have to build the entire stack, right? You add or you build what you're good at, and then leverage the entire stack to build your solution. So that accelerates time to market. Vendor neutrality, this is the biggest benefit that we believe, right? By having that southbound abstraction, the API layer, that allows us to manage platforms from any vendor or different types of resources. Even if you are creating your own or non-standard device, as long as you have a connector written there, you have a full stack that's able to manage your device and support it. So vendor neutrality is achieved there. Easier and more scalable management solutions. This is one of the design goals now we are trying to achieve. Leveraging this ODIN stack, you should be able to build an easier management by not just heading to Redfish alone. Influencing features. This is again by playing with or being part of ODIN, you get to influence the features that gets built as part of ODIN. Now, this slide just gives another glimpse in terms of what advantage each segment has. If you look at the top layer where all the orchestration software or the OSS mono kind of layers that use, they get the benefit of interoperability. As long as they can speak Redfish, I think they will be able to manage any device that's manageable through ODIN, right? When we have ODIN. So that's the benefit the orchestration layer has. Now, the next layer, when you will be able to contribute and also consume the individual bits and pieces that ODIN has. There are many different contributions coming in. Resource aggregator from HPE, we are building, we from AMA are building the composability, and then we are also getting a few more contributions from different vendors. So each one of them being designed in a microservices way is independently and also together consumable. You can extend, and we will also welcome more contributions from you. ODM-driven changes to DMTF Redfish. Now, DMTF is doing an excellent job in terms of defining the management standards, right, for any new types of platforms that are coming in. When we together work as a ODM community and work on the futuristic or the next world, we will also be identifying newer use cases which we can take it back to DMTF, work with them and define all the new standards that will be future. Build and consume resource API adapters. This is one point that I mentioned in the previous slide itself. Right? If you are having your own device, which is which has your value add and things like that, you can add an adapter and enable that device to be managed by the ODM stack. So that expands your reach. And if you are a device vendor, let's say you are a platform vendor, then you can ensure that you are adhering to the ODM resource profiles. That allows you to be managed and easily expandable. So where are we now in terms of ODM project status? We are an independent, unfunded project right now under the Linux Foundation. The TSC is up, Technical Steering Committee is up and running. We have weekly calls on Wednesdays, 5 p.m. CT. We use GitHub, the sources are managed and the developments managed there. At this point, we have 5 partner companies and we are actively discussing with many more, inviting them to join. And we are very hopeful. And we are also continuously outreaching to standards body like DMTF, CNTT, and OCP, you guys, many more. So what's the call to action? We want to collaborate with OCP, ODM. Our goal is to collaborate on the Redfish profiles, especially for compute storage, network fabrics, and the composition and aggregation part, right? So we want to embrace and extend the existing profiles, existing Redfish profile. And by working together, we also want to define newer ones when and where we see it appropriate. With that, so we have the website at the bottom. Please do take a look. We welcome you to join us and to work together. With that, we can go to questions. That's all we had, Hemo.
Yep. Hey, Jose Prabhu, and thanks to you and Jonas. Let me see. On chat, we are monitoring. Currently, there are no questions. I do have a couple of questions. One is on this call to action, when you say embrace and extend existing OCP profile. In the morning, we talked about baseline profile, and then John mentioned that going forward, we are going to require different platform to have the requirement as base profile, and they may add additional profile. So my question is, in other OCP projects, which projects you are planning to provide input, and when you say extend this, do you have an active proposal or for these different platforms, or you're planning to work in the project itself?
So we learned from a meeting we had with OCP some time back that the baseline profiles were handled by the hardware management project, I think. Mm-hmm. So that's something we want to reach out to. I also saw there was some server profiles from OCP.
Yep.
That's where we feel those two are of importance to us. There might be references in there to older versions of the spec than we need. We need newer because we need to, for instance, support the aggregation service as well as some enhancement that has been done to the fabric model in DMTF. But then by reference to those and adding our own properties that we need specifically, we were thinking we could reuse the hard work that has been done already by OCP in this scenario and not having to start from scratch.
That'll be great, because this was the one discussion we have. Like, it'll be good for you to, if specific extension or proposals, you have to bring it to hardware management project. John, are you, do you have any comment on this?
Well, as we mentioned this morning, those proposals to extending any of the profiles will be done as a GitHub issue and then discussed by the organization. And the issue with the baseline was that extending it impacts all the platforms. And so you really need all the platforms to buy into this, any change that you make to the profile before you can really adopt it. So it's not as easy as let's update the baseline profile and then all the other platforms get impacted. All the other platforms may raise a holler if you add something they don't want. So it's up to the hardware management group to say, hey, this is being added to the baseline. We need a voice from each of the other platforms to say, is this okay? And if it's not okay, guess what? We don't add it. And you go to each individual platform that wants to add it, and they can add it as the extension. So that's one of the reasons the baseline hasn't moved much, is because the movement of the baseline will impact everybody.
Yeah, understood. Thanks, John.
Okay. I do see a question that came. Let me read that question to you. Question from Matt Shumway. Are there any issues in management specific to storage, or are storage problems similar enough to other hardware management challenges? That's the question.
I think Redfish has a very good handle on direct attached storage now. Shared storage is being worked on, I think. And John, feel free to comment on that as well, because you're more into DMTF than me. So for what we can see, I think what we have in the first release of Odin as a project is going to be to use the direct attached storage model of Redfish, which is under storage, and be able to, create volumes and different RAID types and these type of things. Shared storage is going to be a little bit more long term, but it's also very, very important from a composition point of view, of course.
Thanks, Jonas. I have one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
So I will say, if you start talking about RAID types, you've now gone across the SNIA because they handle all the models for quote actual storage. So they have the aspects of RAID, because that's not a subject matter that the DMTF deals with. That's something that the SNIA would deal with.
Yeah, okay. I see RAID types in DMTF spec, but
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. I have one more question on the bottom layer, the resource management abstraction layer. I did see you still had a number of plugins listed there, including IPMI, proprietary. So I think top part we are addressing. My question is, how are we going to address that bottom part also? Because requiring so many plugin, also having that, and I do understand the heterogeneity, but how do we converge on at least a few than having so many diverse?
Well, so the plugins in itself are obviously not there. We have basically one Redfish plugin in the project. HP has a couple of more plugins. We have one for ILO and another for a Fabric Manager. There is an unmanaged rack plugin being worked on by Intel. We hope that we can get more people to come to the project and help out with other plugins for different type of devices. The very reason Redfish is existing is a big push to get rid of IPMI. But if somebody has an IPMI device and a use case to go implement the plugin, we would welcome that as well. But what's there today is a Redfish plugin, a plugin for unmanaged racks, and some plans to contribute other plugins, as well as a couple of commercial ones.
Okay. Just, Prabhu, you want to say something also?
Yes, yeah. And that is the main advantage of this model, Hemant, right?
Mm-hmm.
When we have the northbound layer, which is always moving up, right? We are identifying new management layers. We are, if you take Redfish, at least we release 2 or 3 times a year, right? In terms of schemas and specs. The bottom layer, when the device is catching up, we want to make it very abstracted so that when you write the southbound plugin to manage your specific device, then you are catching up very easily. So I can make a device, I can manufacture a device which supports only, let's say, Redfish 2.0, 1.8, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
The standards, if the spec moves up and if ODM community keeps implementing the newer specs and things like that, the device with older spec will still be able to manageable. That's one advantage. And Jonas made a good point in terms of IPMI, right? In a typical deployment, it's always a mixed bag. Right? Even with Redfish, we see many versions being supported with many different implementation, because in the spec, when we say certain things are optional, depending on what vendors want, they implement whatever they feel is important. Right? So those
Right.
kind of abstractions, this plugin layer makes it much easier. So as and when you keep adding, and that's why we want more players to come in, many different players, so that they can contribute. We can keep expanding that southbound, the plugin layer, so that we will cover a wide variety of devices. That's the goal.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's see. There are no more questions on the public conversation. Let me ask in the audio here, anybody has any additional questions, comments? Okay, in that case, let's thank our speaker. Thanks, Jose Prabhu and Jonas, for